Президент Путин, все готово.
Хорошо. Операция сейчас в силе. Давай, давай, давай.
Операции уже в силе. Идти.
Європа зараз повинна прокинутися.
Hello.
Stop! You violated the law. Pay the court a fine or serve your sentence.
Oh my, it was as if I was censored again. Not this time. Better check the news. What's happening in the world?
I turned to ask the question, so anxious, my thoughts. Your lips were soft like winter, in your passion, I was lost.
It's safe to say Ukraine has had a lot of history.
The USSR completely fell apart by the end of 1991. Congratulations, Ukraine. You are now free from Russia.
Bad news. You're all completely broke.
Don't worry, you have a strong future ahead of you now.
To summarize, Ukraine would go through a very complex political and economic time, overthrowing their president, install an pro-Western government, have a large ethnic Russian majority within their borders that demanded more from them, the territory of Crimea seized by Russia, and more of the country plunged into civil conflict during the war in Donbass.
Now Russia and Ukraine had beef since Crimea. Safe to say they didn't get along. But after the Donbass war, they hated each other even more than before.
Putin ordered his men to begin military exercises along the border of Ukraine despite the outbreak of the unspecified virus of unknown origins still around, as well as drafting plans for an invasion. Russian paratroopers began conducting exercises near the Ukraine border, while Russian aircraft would occasionally fly into Ukrainian airspace. In response, NATO began calling for diplomatic talks while conducting military exercises of their own.
At first, NATO had managed to calm the situation, but talks broke down between Russia. Soon many diplomats withdrew from foreign countries, returning to Russia, along with many nationals and financial assets. Then again in October 2021, Russia began its second military build-up across Belarus all the way to Crimea. As Russia continued to push the West more towards a deal that favored a neutral Eastern Europe, diplomatic talks of all countries who joined NATO since 1995, and guarantees that Ukraine would never join NATO or hold a NATO weapons.
The West, particularly America, began to worry that there was an impending invasion about to occur within the next several months. Russia then withdrew from talks entirely. There was nothing but silence for many, many months. The Russians had arrived.
Что случилось?
Президент Путин, мы как будто забуксовали в Киеве.
Дмитрий. Еще один хороший кадр. Что это такое?
The Russians had only one slight problem.
Давайте, браття, ми не можемо тут жити боягузами. Треба боротися. Або помри, намагаючись.
There were anti-tank rounds.
Ukrainians began to fight back and hold the line. The Russians could not supply their troops, and began to fall back. The logistical challenge had all but collapsed in the face of the Ukrainian counterattacks. And for now, Zelensky and Kiev were safe.
Quick! Can you spot the Nazi?
Did you see him? Easy, right?
That yellow armband is a Volksangel, a German symbol used by several SS divisions during the Second World War.
Correct, they're here.
Far-right graffiti is appearing, daubed on the walls of the city.
Here. And here.
Национал-социалистская тематика иногда в некоторых людях она есть проступает.
Not the best lot to represent your country, to be totally honest.
Regiment space in Mariupol was the prime target since they were one of many militia groups Ukraine had been using to fight the separatists. Equally, the Russians employed the use of Wagner mercenaries who equally were the same as the Azov regiment. Fighting remained mostly within the Donbas region, as Russia liberated many of their comrades. While America and its allies had been busy, very busy.
America was busy with printing money. Biden's policy was to chill out with the rest of Europe. And boy did the shekels start flowing. The Russians continued the advance along the front as Ukraine had the absolute shit bombed out of them.
Many occupied cities within the Russian-held territory began a passive-aggressive campaign of demonstrations and sabotage efforts. This did not stop the fighting, it just raised the stakes higher, especially going into Pride Month.
As the Russians came to the end of their offensive in the Donbass region, they had liberated much of the territory in the newly recognized Luhansk People's Republic. Despite their previous losses in the north, Russia had delivered their promise they had made to the Donbass people, and one of the two people's republics were fully liberated. August came and went with many more attacks with missiles. The Ukraine government was eager for a win, so presented several plans to attack Russian positions, but morale was low, and many of the divisions and brigades were only at half strength. If they were going to strike, the timing had to be right.
Everyone within the CSTO alliance took this time to help one another, by that I mean, stab each other in the back. Armenia and Azerbaijan resumed their own war, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan had some border clashes. The IAEA heavily requested to inspect one of the largest nuclear power plants on Earth, under Russian control, publishing a report that said the shelling from both sides was heavily impacting the site. Until they got back to Kiev, where strangely, they took back their report and published a new one. I wonder why that is. Safe to say that Putin wasn't too happy about all that.
Putin ordered that Russian troops be mobilized to go to the front, but was still attempting to be diplomatic with Kiev to come to a peaceful Zelensky poked the Russian bear. You don't poke the Russian bear, ever.
Russia laid fire towards the entirety of Ukraine, destroying close to 80% of its electrical and water infrastructure. When Russia withdrew from Kherson, Putin hired Yevgeny Prigozhin to prepare his Wagner forces for the front. Then he mobilized over 300,000 troops. Zelensky began to target the Orthodox Church within Ukraine itself, hitting several sites, seizing their lands, their gold, and most importantly, the people. Zelensky was running out of manpower, so not only was it illegal to leave the country if you were an over 18-year-old male, but now it was also illegal for females too. To appease Putin, the main Russian command came up with a two-part plan. First, the Russians would continue to destroy key Ukrainian targets until the winter set in. Then also they would focus on one particular city of importance until the next major offensive. That city was Bakhmut.
Мария, Санта-Ут ты ордернул. Иван Туагнерт атака Тычита в Бахмут.
Yes, Putin.
Putin decided that liberating the territory was not good enough. No, he had to annex it directly into the Russian Federation, and allow the states to hold referendums to the Russian-speaking, ethnic Russians, to decide whether or not they wanted to live in Russia. Then set his sights on the key city of Bakhmut.
The battle began back in August of 2022, tasked with PMC, Wagner military forces of close to 50,000 strong, aided by both the Russian armed forces, the local Donetsk and Luhansk People's Militia. Kherson had been a defeat. This would be different.
The main Russian battle plan was to first take the city by force. However, the Ukrainians held on to the city, sending wave after wave of cannon fodder into the meat grinder. The Russian general staff then ordered the entire city to be reduced to rubble. Thousands upon thousands of artillery shells, jet missiles, mortars, tanks, RPGs, grenades, among the thousands of battle-hardened troops turned a city of 71,000 people into a giant dirt pile.
The next major objective was to cut the two main supply lines that were linked to the highways on the east and the west, to encircle the city, then to move against other targets in the west and north. The intense fighting led to mountains of causalities on both sides of the war. Zelensky demanded that the Ukraine military treat Bakhmut like Stalingrad, and defended to the last man. Putin authorized the use of Russian prisoners to be recruited into Wagner to keep up the manpower. Both sides had raised their armies to almost 200,000 each on the Bakhmut front, sending more than half to the city alone during the entire offensive.
Then the bitter winter set in. Europe's reliance on Russian gas had left many unprepared for the winter and issued decrees limiting the usage of gas and electricity, threatening fines, and possibly jail time. Wagner continued its offensive capabilities, pushing on both outskirts of the city, swallowing up the Ukraine forces slowly. First Christmas, then the New Year, then more and more Russian victories continued as the Ukrainians were pushed back.
Zelensky had left thousands of his own people to die in the city as the Russians crossed the main highway. And that's it. That's all we have. Bakhmut is exciting, but I think it may be time to bring in the big guns. If you don't believe that Ukraine is losing, just listen to the experts.
I can't believe, how many local Australians are actually coming out and waking up. They know about the biolabs. They know that what Russia's doing over there isn't an invasion, it's actually a liberation.
How does this war end, do you think?
We're going to find out. They occupy a piece of ground that's about 900 kilometers long, probably about 75 or 80 kilometers deep. Ukrainian military victory is not high.
Vladimir Putin is not losing the war.
So much misinformation.
Is the eastern region
or are overly optimistic about how quickly this war will be over?
The simple reality, Ukraine is solidly losing this war.
Russia has the momentum, Russia has the initiative, and Russia has realistic objectives that can be attained.
Do you believe there is an end in sight?
Not immediately, no.
That encirclement of those troops seems to be approaching.
We've got no real context of what's actually happening. Kiev would look like it might fall.
Ukrainian TV host calls for the genocide of Russian children.
Если все думают, я сейчас неофициальное лицо, могу говорить, что хочу. Если все думают, что мы гарантированно выиграем войну,
that war is a lot slower than a narrative.
But in this war, you too do not win.
As a man of God, as a minister of the gospel, I have said consistently, I don't believe the narrative of the news, but that doesn't mean that I take sides.
Putin did not move in there accidentally. He had an assessment. He had high likelihood of a certain outcome. That outcome did not happen.